Hello again, everybody. This is Steve Duffy from Robert Ferguson Observatory. Today we're going to do the essentials of PixInsight. Many of you may have heard of PixInsight and wondered whether it's the program for you. It's a popular program for processing deep sky images. It's popular because it's less expensive than Photoshop and it's very full-featured. You can do the complete image processing, but it's also pretty different from Photoshop. So the idea today is to give you a little introduction into what it can do and kind of the basics of getting a picture produced. And we'll save the sophisticated parts for other sessions. So here on the desktop I have three images open, a red, a green, and a blue. You see they're dark. These are stacked images, so I'm not showing the stacking process today. That's kind of a separate video on its own. It's a little bit of a procedure, but assuming that you have stacked images, I'm going to show you how to turn those into a more or less finished colored image. So the first thing here is to look at the PixInsight interface. Now there's a bunch of buttons across the top here, and a lot of those we use pretty routinely. We'll talk about each one as we do it. There's also some menus. We don't use too many of them. This one though, this process menu, we use a lot. So in PixInsight, when you want to take an action, that's called a process. And here we see the process menu, and it's broken up into different kinds of things. So for example, color calibration, they've got different kinds of color calibration you can do. I don't find the differentiation to be that helpful. I usually go straight to all processes, and then I can see all of the available processes. So let's just go to one of the most commonly used processes. We can talk about how this program works. So this is called the Histogram Transformation. And the way that you use this is used sort of like curves. It's used to brighten images. So over here I'm going to take this red image, and the fact that it turned blue means that it's the now selected image. That's the one we're going to act on. And if we go over here and click on this track view check mark, it means it will pull the statistics in from that image and show them in the tool. So now you see that we've got, this is basically a histogram. We see that the histogram is way to the left. So if we were going to brighten this up, there's a couple of things we would like to do. So the normal method is to move this slider to the left, and you see that it's showing you that it's moving the histogram out away from the edge. But we didn't see anything happen in the picture. So if you want to see something happen in the picture, you have to click this preview button. And you see that, well, yeah, something's happening there. It's not very evident yet what's happening. You can't zoom the preview, but you can make the screen full size. Then you can see what's happening a little better. You can see there's a galaxy. In this case, it's the Whirlpool galaxy. And we can push this a little harder so that we can see a little more of it. Now, this is not the practice I'm going to recommend. I'm really just right now showing you how processes work in PixInsight. And so I say, okay, I like that. That's my first initial step. So how do I commit it? How do I make it happen? Well, there's two ways, sometimes three ways. This way, you take this and you drag it onto the actual picture, and it'll make it happen. So I'm going to close the preview right now. And then if I take this little triangle, click and drag it and drop it on this picture, it applies the process. Now what we see in this window is the effect if we applied the same stretch again. You see, so it would move the histogram way to the right. I'm not going to do that, so I'm going to reset this process using that icon and down in the lower right corner. So now it's reset. But I said there was another way. Well, so since I've acted on this picture, I can go up here and I can undo and put it back the way it was. And I can do the same sort of stretch again. And now this time I can just click here without dragging and just say apply, and it will apply it to whatever image window is active. So same basic effect. So you see these controls replicated over and over throughout all the processes in PixInsight. So I wanted to show you that because now we're going to start for real using some of these processes and walk you through them. I'm going to reset this back to 0. Now we're going to take this image from 3 independent channels to a color image, a finished color image, in a few easy steps. And the way I'm going to show you is actually pretty easy, but make no mistake, this is a very sophisticated program, and there are lots of options, and people have developed all kinds of scripts and techniques and workarounds to do all sorts of complicated things with it. But we're going to avoid all that for this session and just show you how to do the basics. So the first thing is I want to see what's in these images. So they have a thing called a screen stretch, and that's this icon here. And it applies an automatic stretch, which is a pretty good stretch. Now to be fair, I have set the parameters on the stretch in the background so that I get a result that I like. I'm not going to show you how to set those today, but we'll do that in another session. And we'll do that to each of the images in turn. So that was the red, there's the green channel, and there's the blue channel. Now let's start with, let's go back to the red channel. Now if you look carefully at this image, you can see that it's pretty dark. The sky background is pretty dark up around here, but there's some kind of brightness down here. And that's what we call a gradient. It's not a natural part of the picture. So one of the first things that we do with these images is we try to remove the gradient. And for that, there's a process called dynamic background extraction. There it is. Now, dynamic means something. It means it's the only active process at any one time. You can only, it takes control of the active image, and it's the only thing you can work on until you complete this process and close it. So we're going to do that. So first thing you do is you got to select the target. So you click on it, and now it knows that you're working on this image. Don't worry too much about where the crosshairs are. That doesn't matter too much. Now we look at 2 sections, really 3 sections in the end, but first thing we're going to do is look at this tolerance. Now the default is 0.5. I like to set it to 1.5. Basically, oh, this is another feature of PixInsight. There's very little help information. There's no manual, nothing like that, but there are a lot of these in-depth tool tips. And so what tolerance is letting us do is pick a pretty wide range of brightnesses in the background. Okay? Shadows relaxation. So we're going to increase that as well to 5. The reason is in the corners it's often very dark, and up in the center it's bright. So a lot of times we won't get a good sample in the corner unless we relax the shadows. Smoothing factor, I'm going to increase that to 0.5. Basically what that does is make sure that we take broader steps in the gradient, that we're looking for big changes, not little tiny local changes. None of these are super critical, but if your picture is not generating samples correctly, you can play with these parameters. Next thing, default sample radius. I like to use an odd number, and I like to use 11 to make it be big enough. Samples per row, I don't like a high number because it makes tiny corrections. So I usually use 6. And we'll see what that looks like in a moment. And minimum sample weight, since these are unstretched images, I like to use 0.25. Okay, so that's most of the things that you have to change. Another thing that I like to change is click on sample color, because the sample color that you see there is gray on a gray background. It doesn't show up very well. So I usually come in here, slide this red all the way to 0, and then the sample color is cyan, I guess. Shows up better for me. Finally, down here we choose, under target image correction, division. And we choose division instead of subtraction because we want to divide by the background model so that it doesn't force any of the samples to go below 0. If you subtract, it can put them all the way into negative numbers, and it ends up leaving a kind of blackness in your image that you can't take out by stretching. So I always use division. You might think you're done, but not quite. Now we generate these sample points, and you see that I've got sample points pretty well represented across the whole image, which is good. Now they're movable. Like in this case, I think this is a little too close to the halo of the galaxy. I don't want it to be influenced by the halo of the galaxy, so I'm just going to move it out here to a black spot. Now watch what happens when I move it over that little star. Do you see that star over? I'm going to leave it there and show you. This is the star. And we never want to leave a sample point over a star like that, because the sample is being averaged over this space, and that much black will mess up the average. So we move it to some place where it's pretty clear of black, like there. That's a good spot. Now you can go around and do this carefully with all of your sample points. I don't see any that are really problematic in this image, so I'm going to say this is fine. So now let's apply it and see what happens. So you notice that here it's not a square anymore. The apply becomes an execute, and it's still going to work about the same way, but for some reason they're not very consistent with the icons and the way these controls work. Let's just click it and watch what happens. So we get 2 new images out of this. We've got a new version of red with the background extracted, and we've got the background image. The first thing you want to do is look at the background image and see if it really looks like what you expected. So remember, we said it was dark up around here and it had some brightness across the bottom. So what we expect in the background image is some brightness here and darkness up here that we're going to divide through to flatten it out. So let's see if that's what we got. So we'll stretch this, auto stretch this. And yes, it's a little different than I expected. It's brighter at the bottom than it is at the top. It's dark on the edges. I didn't expect this so much, but let's see what it did. It's a pretty smooth looking gradient. So let's try it and see if it really worked for us. So we're going to look at the improved picture now. And yes, it does look better. Looks better than the prior one in terms of that brightness along the bottom is pretty much gone. So I'm going to say let's go with that. I'll minimize it and put it over here to the side. Now before we go, there's a little shortcut here, which is, let's say I've corrected all of these sample points and moved them around and got them in the right places that I want. I want to do that on the next picture. I want to save all these settings and do that to every picture, right? The only way to move to the next picture is to close this. Because it's a dynamic process, you can't do anything until you end the process. But we're going to take a little bit of a shortcut. And we're going to drag this icon onto the desktop. And what that does basically is save all of our settings. So we'll close this. Now this picture is released. We can close it. And we want to get back to this next picture. So we reopen this icon. And it applied it to the active picture, which is this one, which is good. Now let's take a look at this picture, and what do we see in this picture? This is the blue. And what we see is that it's kind of brighter down in this corner, and it's kind of darker up here. So you see it saved our moved position there. Let's try running it again and see what we get. So first thing is, let's look at the background model, see if we got a model that we expected. And yes, we did. It's kind of brighter down here in the corner and kind of darker up here. I think we're going to get a good result from that. So we're going to accept this, brighten it up to see what we got. And yes, it looks much better than it did. So minimize that and put it to the side. We end this process by clicking on the X. This picture is released, close it. So now we're going to move on to the red frame. Reopen our settings and apply it. And check the background. Now you may think that it's kind of futile or useless to be constantly checking this background, but I assure you it is not. You often, when you apply it to a different frame, you get a weird result that you didn't expect, and you need to adjust the points or the parameters or make other adjustments that we're not going to cover here. But in this case, we look at the primary image. It is kind of bright here. It's perhaps got a little bit of brightness here, and it's darker here and here. And that is what the background model is telling us. If we look at that, brighter here and here, darker here and here. So again, I think we've got a good model for all three of these, so I'm happy with that. We can close this. We can stretch this. And it looks good. I'm going to minimize it, put it in the corner. I can close this and this. We're done with that. I'm going to save this process icon. We may need to use that again after we've done the channel combination. We'll do that now and see what happens. So go back to all processes and find the channel combination process. So here you see the word auto, and you might think that that's automatically going to pick red, green, and blue, but sadly that seldom works. So we're going to pick them manually. So for red, we pick red. For green, we pick green. And for blue, we pick blue. So this is one of those instances where you're not sure what to do. You can't drag this onto an image because there is no image. This one you might think would work, but if it won't work because it's going to say it can only be executed on an active image window. So what we have to do in this case is apply global. And there's our color image. Where's the color? Well, we have to stretch it. And yeah, there's the color. You can see that there is color, but it's not very well saturated. But in fact, the color background looks pretty good, pretty neutral, maybe a little greenish cast, but that's okay. I think we'll take it. So now, what do we need to do? Well, the first thing we need to do at this point is color calibration. So you might notice that there is a bit of a greenish cast. I'm going to use the color calibration process that I always use, which is photometric color calibration. And what this does is it actually plate solves this image, uses the stars, looks up the known spectral colors of the stars, and corrects the image so that the stars are the right spectral color. And in so doing, it corrects the whole image. So the first thing we have to do is tell it where we are. So how am I going to do that? Well, you have search coordinates and acquire from image. Acquire from image really only works if it's still a fits image. So what we're going to do is search coordinates. And I'm going to type in here that this is M51. It finds the coordinates, and then I say get those coordinates, and it copies them back into the process here. Great. Now it wants to know the observation date and time, the focal length, and the pixel size. Well, do I remember that exactly? Not exactly. So let's find out how to do that. So we're going to go back to one of the original fits images. So we go into, let's say, red, and we'll pick one of these and open it up. So this is, it's a calibrated image, but it has not been stacked. And we say process, all processes, fits header. And then we choose that image, red, this one, M51 red. And in the fits header, we can read. So the observation date was 2016, 5/27 at 8:09 Zulu. So change this. Okay, close enough. It doesn't need to be quite perfect, but it does need to be pretty close. So now we need to know the focal length, and if you have your image acquisition software set up correctly, that should be in here. And as we go down, we say, well, where's the focal length? It should be here somewhere. There it is, focal length, 1000. So 1000 is correct. Now we say pixel size. Oh, it's right there. It was right at the top. 10.8, X and Y. So we type 10.8. And we're done with that. And we're done with this image. So now we just tell it to execute. And it's going to go off and it's going to plate solve this image and curve fit it and do all the color calibration and background neutralization all in one step. Now, I will say it's very critical to get this focal length and pixel size correct, or it won't solve the image very well. So here you see the curve fitting. This is a pretty good curve, pretty linear. Sometimes you see a big cloud of points. Gives you a little bit of doubt about it, but this one looks really very good. So we're just going to go with it. And you see that, yes, we got a very accurately color calibrated picture. I love this method or this process. I use it all the time. Done with that process, we can close it. So now we have a color image and it's color calibrated, but it's not stretched. And if we remove the screen stretch, we see that, yes, it is in fact black. So we're going to stretch it using a two-part process. The first thing I'm going to do is open the screen transfer function. That's what this looks like. And then I'm going to reopen the histogram transformation process and reset that. I want it to show me the active window, and you see that this histogram is now colored because we've got a color image. So on the screen transfer function, the color channels are locked together. We want to leave them locked because it's color calibrated. And this radar radiation icon is the auto screen stretch. So we click that and it stretches the picture just about like it was before. Okay? Now we have some control over that. The stretch is way hidden down here in the corner. There's actually two sets of arrows there, and we're going to expand this out to show you that. So click on the plus and then click where those arrows are, and it starts expanding the scale. Okay? Now we can't operate on this yet because we have to go back and choose the arrow again to operate. But now, if we operate on these sliders, you'll see the picture change. So I can make it dimmer or brighter. And let's say I like it. I kind of like it like that. So this is call it the mid-tone slider. And this is the black slider. So I can play with this and brighten or darken the blacks or the dimmest parts of the image. Now, I find that in actual practice, the best thing to do is leave the blacks alone and just play with the midtones and get it kind of to where you like the trade-off you're making between the target object and the background. So I like that pretty well. So what are we going to do with that? Well, there's a neat little trick, which is now you take this, you grab this process icon down in the corner, you drag it over here, and you drop it in the bottom of this window on that bar, and it applies those settings to the histogram transformation. So you see that our curve, our mid-tone slider is way over here now, and you can see that our curve is really radically sharp. But it's going to be okay. We're going to apply that. Oh, well, our image turned white. What happened? Well, we've still got the auto stretch applied in addition to the real stretch. So if we remove the auto stretch and reset this to neutral, and now you see our histogram has moved over pretty much where it should be, where we would like it. And I'm going to say we're done with the screen transfer function. Now we have a permanently stretched image. And I usually like to save this under a different name. So I would go over here and right click on that tab and change the identifier. The identifier has rules. It can't start with a number and it can't have any special characters. So I usually do something like this, RGB underscore HS, HS standing for histogram stretch. So now it has a new name. It's not saved, it's just renamed. I can say File, Save As, change the file type to, I usually like to use TIFF. They always recommend that you use XISF files. That's fine. You can use either one. I use TIFF because I often take my files into Photoshop at the end for some touch-up. And we'll go back to, we'll open that folder and save it in there. And we want to save it as a 16-bit. It's tempting to save it as a 32-bit. That seldom provides you any advantage, and it certainly increases your file size. Okay, so that's saved. So we didn't overwrite anything in our originals, and yet we now have a stretched image. So we're going to leave this histogram stretch here because we're probably going to use it again, so just minimize it and park it over here. So now we need to take a close look at this image. I'm going to go to full scale. And I'm going to zoom way in. And you can see there's quite a bit of noise, especially around the galaxy here. We've got to do something about that noise. So let me go back to normal size so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to click on this little icon here. Go back to normal size. I'm going to say extract the luminance. So there's two icons here that look similar. This one with the 3 color bars means break this image back into its 3 color channels. This one means extract the luminance. That's what I'm going to do. Now I've got just the luminance out of this image. And I'm going to take the histogram stretch again. What we're going to do with this luminance is we're going to use it as a mask. Because we want to work on the noise in the background, and we don't want to work on the noise in the galaxy. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to make it the active image. I'm going to turn on the preview. And I'm going to say, okay, now what I want to do is make everything black be really black. And everything white be really white. So this time, instead of dragging the midtone slider, I'm going to drag the white slider over until most of the galaxy is white, but I start seeing the background come up again. You see that? I don't want that, so I want it kind of like right about there. And I'm going to say apply. Okay, I can close the preview, reset the histogram, minimize it. Now if we look at this image, this is our mask, and we blow it up again, we see the mask is just as noisy as the original image was. So we don't really like that. We need to blur it a little bit. So we're going to use convolution to do that. So we're going to find the convolution process. And we'll set this to 3 standard deviations. I don't know, that's just a guess. You don't need a lot of blurring. You don't want to smear it all up, but you do want some. And I'm going to say do it, and yeah, that kind of got rid of the noise for me without obliterating the stars completely. That's good. I'm going to use that. So shrink this back to regular size. And now, how do I use it as a mask? Well, you grab this tab right here, click and hold with your mouse, and drag that tab over here and put it right below the tab on the color picture, and then let go. You don't put it on top of the tab or anything else. Now we can't close this, but we can minimize it and put it off to the side with our other ones. So now we see that we've got a mask. But the problem with this mask is the red is the mask. So what we have is that the galaxy is unmasked and the sky is masked. Well, that's the exact opposite of what we want. So we go up here to our toolbar and we choose this little icon here, which is Invert the Mask. And now the galaxy is masked and the sky is pretty much not masked. Perfect. But it's going to be hard to see what we're doing with all of that. So we're going to not show. So this icon here is hide the mask so we can see what we're doing. Back to full size. Back to full expansion so we can see the noise again. Now we're going to open up the multi-scale linear transform. And that's a complicated name. It's a wavelet transform tool. But what it really has in it has this noise reduction feature. So we're going to turn that on, and we're turning it on for layer 1, which is pixel size 1, basically. Threshold is 3 standard deviations. The amount we're going to leave at 1, and we're going to set the iterations to 3. Because most of the noise is in the 1 pixel category. I'm going to go to the 2 pixel category. Again, turn on noise reduction. 2 standard deviations. I'm going to reduce the amount to 2/3 and 2 iterations. And go to the 4 pixel category, turn on noise reduction. Now we're starting to get into bigger structures. We don't want to do very much noise reduction at this level. So we reduce it to 1 standard deviation. We reduce this to 1/3 and leave it at 1 iteration. Now, how do I know these numbers? Just from experience. One of the things about PixInsight, you'll find that it requires a lot of trial and error when you're getting used to it. One of the things that people will often do to save time is create previews and operate on the previews. So in this case, we're going to create a preview right here. And then you see that there's a preview window that's appeared. Select that preview. We can make it its normal size by clicking. We clicked on that little icon. And now we can operate on the preview and see if it's having the effect that we want. So we drag this little triangle and drop it. And that's a quick and easy way without waiting for it to process the whole image, because sometimes it takes a long time to process a whole image. Now that looked pretty good, but suppose it didn't and I wanted to reset the preview. This does not work on previews. You see what it's undoing? It's undoing the image identifier. It will undo the name that we gave to the original image. If you want to undo a preview, I can't demonstrate this on screen, but you hold down Control and Shift and then Z. And that will flip back and forth. That's a do and undo for previews. Control, Shift, Z. And the Z is the operative. Okay. So I think that's going to work. So I'm going to go up here and delete the preview again. Go back to full screen. I'm going to operate on the whole image, which I can do by just clicking the square. And that did a pretty good job for me. The noise, the background is much smoother, and we didn't hurt the galaxy much at all. I'm happy with that. I'm going to shrink this and park it. I think we'll be using it again later. Now let's put this back to a more manageable size. Let's say that size. So what do we see now that this image needs? Well, it obviously needs some color saturation. But we want the color saturation to appear in the galaxy and not in the background. We want the background to stay neutral. So this fact that this tab is brown tells us that there's a mask, an active mask. So we go back here, we see there's an active mask. If we increase saturation, the mask is reversed again. So we need to invert the mask again. Now we're going to increase saturation everywhere that it's white in the mask. So on the galaxy and the stars, which is perfect. So we can hide this again. And let's try to increase saturation. So my favorite tool for this is curves. So we go to all processes, curves, transformation. And over here there's a saturation button. And we're going to want to turn the preview on for this. And we're going to want to make the preview big. That's as big as you can make it. And then we're going to start increasing the saturation and watch what happens. Well, that increased it. It did okay, but I wish there was a little more blue. But I don't want to push this too much harder, because what's going to happen is right here where it's the dust lane is kind of reddish brown, that is going to turn oversaturated. So I'm going to apply this, but now we need another trick. So I'll reset curves and park that, because we'll probably use it again also. And I'll go to a different tool called the color saturation tool, or process. And so what I want to do here is I want to increase the saturation of these blues. So that's kind of this range right here. So since I want to bracket that range, I put a point there and a point there. What I'm going to do is pull up on this curve. But when I pull up, it's going to get a sinusoidal response, and this side is going to go down. So I'm going to put some other points out here to anchor it. You don't need to anchor the very ends, because they are already anchored. So now I've got some anchor points. And now I'll put a point here. Oh, need to activate the preview again. And then I'm going to pull up on this middle of this blue. And it did get a little more saturated. If you can cycle the preview and see that it's a little more saturated, but it's not really enough yet. So what I want to do is increase the range so I can go up even higher on the saturation. So drag it up even more. And perhaps I need to drag these points up a little as well, or just remove them. So I select that point and delete it. And I can select this point and delete it too. That one was too much, so I'm going to need to go back and bring that back into line a little better. So now my saturation is kind of getting more what I would like to see in terms of the blues. But I see a problem, which is while the galaxy now looks pretty good, this blue star up here doesn't look good. It's oversaturated. So I'm going to minimize this, leave it where it is. I'm going to close this preview. I'm going to go to my mask, which is this luminance. I'm going to say, well, I need to fix that star so that it's not affected by that saturation. So, process, clone stamp. So the first thing I need to do is click on an image that's going to be the target. Then I need to increase my radius. I need to put this up to like 25. And then this is a little non-intuitive. Hold down Control and click there. And you see that my brush size is still too small. So I'm going to increase it to 50. Now it's copying from that point. And I'm going to use that and blot out the sun. Now, we'll delve more into clone stamp later, but I'm happy with that. I'm going to say execute, and that is done. Now I need to go to my main image, which is here, and delete that mask. So now it's not brown anymore. Now I need to find my mask again, which I can do from here, which is this luminance. Drag it back into place. I can minimize this again. Now open my color saturation tool, turn on the preview, make it big. And yes, we have a much more subdued response around that star, and the blue in the galaxy looks pretty good. So I'm going to go with that. Close the preview, and now we have our galaxy and our blue stars saturated. So we're looking pretty good overall. So now we might need a little sharpening. Okay, so here we have a preview. And what we're going to do is sharpen this by sharpening the 4-pixel layer. So I'm going to set that value of bias to 0.125. which I know to be a pretty reliable value from prior experience. This is a very sensitive slider. It's very easy to overdo it or underdo it. Let's see what that does. So I hit enter, I see the value is up here, so I know that it's taken in the process. Now I drag this triangle onto the image, and yeah, that's a pretty good result. If you overdo it, it starts really buggering up the star, and I think we'll just leave it at that. So we can put this away for now, delete the preview, go back to our main image, go back to big scale, and apply this to the whole image. And since we have our mask, it should not affect the background at all. And yes, we see that the background does not look much changed, but the galaxy definitely got sharper. So good, we like that. So now go back to maybe more normal size. The sky is still too bright. I look at my values, 0.21, well, 0.19 or so is a good value. So it's not way too bright, but it's brighter than we would like. So we open up our histogram transformation. We look at our preview again, activate the following, the image following, and so we can see our histogram. I'm going to start removing the low end of the histogram and watch that sky darken up. That looks quite a bit better. I don't think I want to do any more at this time. Apply that. And overall, that looks pretty good. It seems to me that the image is over full. So if I shrink it to normal size, we've got too much black for the size of this galaxy. So I'm going to do one more thing, which is called dynamic crop. So I find it under dynamic crop. Just draw a box on the screen. I kind of want to center it on that galaxy so you can see the X in the center of the galaxy. That's great. I can pull this down to eliminate that bright star, which is kind of distracting, and pull this back up. A nice crop of that field, and say apply. And we're going to call this image done. So go to the biggest displayable size. Yeah, it's pretty good. I won't say it's perfect. It's not as good as some you can see. There's a lot of sophisticated techniques you can apply to address all the little issues left in this image. But there you have the basic process of processing an image with PixInsight. In future tutorials, we'll talk more about some of the more sophisticated processes. But I hope that helped you get a handle on this complex but powerful program. See you next time.